I'm Steve Sanger, Chairman and CEO of General Mills, and I have the honor this morning, thank you. I have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker, Vernon E. Jordan, Jr. Now, Vernon Jordan has done so many remarkable things in his life. He's a civil rights leader, as past president of the National Urban League, and before that, leading the Voter Education Project, and before that, as executive director of the United Negro College Fund, our co-spot partner this morning in today's breakfast. He's a successful businessman, in his current role as senior managing director of Lazard Frere, and also as a director of some of America's best-known companies like American Express and Dow Jones and J.C. Penney, just to name a few. He's a successful lawyer, a graduate of Howard Law School, and a partner in the Washington law firm of Aiken Gump, now of counsel to Aiken Gump. He's been advisor to presidents, as we all know. In 1992, he led the transition team of President-elect then, Bill Clinton. And in the year 2001, he was chosen by the NAACP to receive its highest honor for achievement, the Spingarn Medal. And all of these remarkable things and many more are covered in Vernon's memoir, Vernon Can Read, which is a wonderful book in which I promised Vernon I would plug this morning. Now, the part I relate to most on a personal level is Chapter 3, which covers Vernon's college years at DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana. And I relate to that because I went to DePauw University many, many years after Vernon did, of course. It was actually about 10 years. And I can recall, though, like it was only yesterday, walking across the DePauw campus on a chilly night in the spring of my senior year, noticing a knot of students talking in agitated tones, stopping to ask them what was wrong, and hearing the terrible news that Dr. Martin Luther King had just been shot and killed in Memphis. And I remember the feeling of shock that swept our campus that night as we wondered, as students, as all America wondered, who would step forward now? Who could lead now to carry on the dream? As it turned out, no one person could ever replace Martin Luther King. Rather, many African American leaders would step forward in the civil rights movement, in business, in government, and in the professions to carry on the struggle for racial equality in America. And as I talked to my fellow DePauw students that night, we could not know that one of the foremost of those new leaders would be a man who had walked our own campus just a decade before. We would have been very proud if we'd known that then, and I am very proud and honored to know that now. And I am very proud to introduce that man to you this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vernon Jordan.
Thank you very much. Senator Mark Dayton, Senator Norm Coleman, Mayor R.T. Ryback, dais guests, ladies and gentlemen. Steve Sanger is a friend of mine, a fellow alumnus, as you've heard, from DePauw University, a wonderful little school in Greencastle, Indiana. And Steve is one of the leading chairmen and CEOs in American industry. And you should know that early last fall, Steve Sanger issued a subpoena to me ordering that I should be here this morning. Well, I've had a lot of experience with subpoenas. And what I know about subpoenas is that when you get one, you have to show up. And so I am happy to join you here today for your celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. and it is a special treat for me to be back in Minneapolis, even in midwinter. Minneapolis and Minnesota have a special resonance for those of us who came of age in the civil rights movement. It is where Roy Wilkins of the NAACP was born. It is where Whitney Young earned his MA degree from the University of Minnesota and had his first Urban League job at the St. Paul Urban League. This is a state with a strong tradition of fairness and justice, of independence and liberalism, embodied by Hubert Humphrey, Paul Wellstone, Walter Mondale, Cecil Newman, Retha Clark King, and Alan Page. So I am grateful to the General Mills Foundation and the United Negro College Fund for carrying on that proud tradition through this breakfast, and for inviting me to share my thoughts about Dr. King, the revolution he led, and the world in which we live. Viewing today's world through the prism of your 2004 theme, strength to love, courage to change, I have to observe that our world has a serious shortage of love and few signs of courage to change. In fact, there is evidence that the world this morning is in a whole world of trouble. Our sons and daughters, brothers and sisters are still fighting and dying in Iraq and Afghanistan. We are still trying to find Saddam's weapons, and the nuclear proliferation imperils our earth. Ethnic and religious strife is rampant throughout much of the world. Our once strong international alliances are unraveling. We live daily with fresh terror alerts and attempts to limit our civil liberties. Every night, 1 billion people go to sleep hungry in a world of unparalleled riches. The overwhelming majority of the world's poorest of the poor are brown or black. W.B. Du Bois was right when he said that the problem of the 20th century will be the problem of the color line. This morning, I say that the problem of the 21st century remains the same problem of the color line, the apportionment of wealth and of misery based on race. Here in America, that color line has been bent, but it has not been broken. The color line no longer determines the lives of some of us, but it does set life's boundaries for too many of us. Our continuing efforts to finish Dr. King's revolution of love, hope, and courage face large obstacles. Even as we spend billions to rebuild Iraq, our own cities, schools, and healthcare systems are in trouble. Each new recession destroys good jobs that don't come back when the economy revives. Key institutions like government, corporations, and churches are under a cloud, losing their old legitimacy and authority as people believe they have been lied to and victimized by moral and economic corruption. Looking at this troubled world, I think, what would Dr. King say? I believe that Martin would tell us to hold firm to hope, to be optimistic about the future. Dr. King lived through bombings and beatings and never lost faith in basic human goodness, in perseverance, in fighting for what is right and true and moral. In his bleakest hours, he retained hope and never gave way to defeatism, for he knew that his cause was just. In a time of a Cold War with the Soviet Union and a hot war in Vietnam, he held fast to the path of nonviolent resolution of conflicts. Listen to what he told America, quote, "Violence solves no social problems. It merely creates new and more complicated ones. Through the vistas of time, a voice still cries to every potential Peter, put up your sword. The shores of history are white with the bleached bones of nations and communities that failed to follow this command," end of quote. And Martin reminded us, did he not, that we must either learn to live together as brothers or we're all going to perish together as fools. In the darkest days of segregation, at a time when black citizens in the South rode the back of the bus and were denied decent jobs and the right to vote, he proclaimed his faith that we shall overcome. He said, "Let us maintain faith in the future. We will confront difficulties and frustrating moments in the struggle to make justice a reality, but we must believe somehow that these problems can be solved. Deep in my heart," he said, "I do believe we shall overcome." That too is my faith and my optimism. My faith and my optimism comes from 68 years of experience. I often meet people who are pessimistic about the future because of the Bush administration's policies. I too have serious reservations about many of them. But I grew up in a Georgia dominated by the likes of Talmadge and Russell. I grew up in the South typified by Strom Thurmond and George Wallace. As Martin prophesied, we overcame them and solved many of the problems those diehard segregationists fostered. Alongside the national and regional problems of those times, and alongside the constant fears that the Cold War would turn into a nuclear winter, today's problems seem far more susceptible to solution. Martin told us we would overcome, and we did, thanks to him, to Whitney, to Roy, to the students at Greensboro, the Freedom Riders, SNCC, and others who followed their leadership. Black people marched and demonstrated and boycotted until America found the courage to change. And millions of our white allies joined us to demand that morality and justice triumph. Those black Americans and white Americans did not just sing, "We shall overcome," they overcame. They put legal segregation in the dumpster of history. They made a peaceful revolution that saved America's soul and made America a beacon unto the nations of the world. So my faith is buttressed by the success of that second American Revolution. My faith is driven by the experience of seeing America change and by believing that change is irreversible. I have witnessed many times in my life America's ability to change. One day, early in 1974, I visited the newly elected mayor of Atlanta, Maynard Jackson, at City Hall. Maynard and I were old friends. We attended the segregated David T. Howard High School together. We played in the school band with hand-me-down used instruments from the white schools. When our band was scheduled to march in a parade for Senator Richard B. Russell's presidential election campaign, a trombone player, Maynard, and a trumpet player, Vernon, protested, "Hell no, we won't go." But then realism trumped our idealism, and we played to protect the jobs of our principal and our bandmaster. But in 1973, 8 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Maynard Jackson, the trombone player, was elected mayor of Atlanta, thus becoming the conductor of America's political symphony, meeting my old friend, now the first black mayor in Atlanta's history. It was clear to me that change had come and our belief vindicated. I had a similar experience this past September 13th, 2003. When I flew to Birmingham, Alabama, to eulogize Deanie Drew, the den mother of the civil rights movement in Birmingham, the chief judge of the United States District Court, Judge U.W. Clemens, a black man, met me at the airport, and we drove downtown to his chambers in the federal building. Looking out from his chambers, I could see the streets where young black and white freedom fighters were attacked by the Birmingham police with dogs and fire hoses. From Judge Clemens' chambers, I could see the shadows of the 16th Street Baptist Church where 4 little black girls were murdered when segregationist terrorists set off a bomb on a September Sunday morning in 1963. I stood there, Fritz, tears streaming down my face, transfixed by the nightmares of 1963 in Birmingham, and on the other hand, by the beauty, solemnity, and power of this black chief federal judge's chambers in 2003 in Birmingham, Alabama. I heard the echo of George Wallace promising segregation today, tomorrow, and forever, but I also heard my mother's blessed assurance that God moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. It was an unforgettable experience for me to stand there in the middle of Birmingham, Wallace country, Bull Connor's place, and realize that we had indeed overcome, that America had overcome. Thomas Wolfe said, America is a place where miracles not only happen, they happen all the time. When Martin and the civil rights movement, what they have wrought was truly a miracle. a miracle that we often forget, but I would have you consider this morning. Since 1963, the numbers of black college graduates increased fourfold. Since 1963, there are now 17 times as many black lawyers and judges, 9 times as many black engineers, 30 times as many black elected officials. Today, black consumer income totals $500 billion, more than the gross national product of over 200 countries in the world, including Australia, Chile, and Switzerland. Today, black people lead multinational corporations that once refused to hire their parents for any but the most menial jobs. 5 of them, Dick Parsons at Time Inc., Ken Chenault at American Express, Stan O'Neill at Merrill Lynch, John Thompson at Symantec, Frank Raines at Fannie Mae. These 5 black brothers run giant multinational corporations whose market capitalization exceeds $300 billion, and they employ more than 300,000 people. In the public sector, Colin Powell, my friend, sits as Secretary of State, and Condoleezza Rice sits as the National Security Advisor. And looking at that, we must ask ourselves, if we have done so much when we had so little, how much more can we do now that we have so much more? There is unfinished work to do. Our task is not done. We cannot take recess. We cannot allow how far we have come to blind us to how far we have left to go. Dr. King's legacy extended beyond faith and optimism. He gave us some guidelines to fulfill that faith and optimism. He urged whites and blacks to stand shoulder to shoulder. He wrote, "There must be a grand alliance of Negro and white. This alliance must consist of the vast majorities of each group. It must have the objective of eradicating the social evils that oppress both white and Negro. It is not only more moral for both races to work together, but more logical," end of quote. At a time when well-intentioned people thought it would be enough just to dismantle the laws that impose segregation, Dr. King saw that blacks and whites were victimized by the social evils of the day. He saw the badge of whiteness as a tool used to keep black people down and give whites the illusion of superiority. Well, I say that while we may have come over here in different ships, most of us are in the same boat now. Today, more whites than blacks are poor, unemployed, without health insurance. Today, more Americans understand that issues like education, affordable housing, and jobs transcend race. Issues labeled social issues are really political issues relating to power and privilege. Solving them requires participating in the political process to ensure that government once more responds to urgent social needs, and as to the continuing national debate over government's proper role, hear one of your own, Hubert Humphrey, who said, listen, the moral test of a government is how that government treats those who are in the dawn of life, the children, the twilight of life, the elderly, the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the handicapped, end of quote. Hubert Humphrey and Dr. King drew a line separating those who would see government as a vehicle for social change and those who would see government as a vehicle to bring more wealth and power to the wealthy and the powerful. The government and the private sector must shoulder their fair share of the responsibility to ensure justice and equality. But I believe, and I've come here to say, that Black Americans have a special responsibility to continue Dr. King's legacy. And we must begin by understanding that whatever our achievements are, however great they may be, whether it's a good job or first-rate education, wealth or social standing, we need to understand in the Black community that wherever we are, we did not get there by ourselves. Indeed, we stand on the shoulders of others who for us made crooked roads straight and rough places plain. I stand here today on the shoulders of my mother, who for 4 years in college and 3 years in law school wrote to me every single day. And every single letter, whether short or long or happy or sad, she told me two things. One, son, if you make a dime, save 2 cents. And she never read Adam Smith. And at the end of every letter, she wrote, son, comma, if you trust him, he'll take care of you. I stand on her shoulders. And because we stand on the shoulders of others, we have a reciprocal responsibility to live our lives and do our work so that others may stand on our shoulders. Therefore, we have a duty to make a personal commitment to excellence, hard work, and sacrifice, to live lives of integrity and ethical behavior, to reach out and lend a helping hand to the least of these, our brothers and sisters. That was Dr. King's way, and indeed it must be ours. For yonder in America, and here in the dark crevices of Minneapolis and St. Paul, there are Black people and poor people who cry out this morning asking, pleading, is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Our responsibility is to turn the question mark into an exclamation point, responding, yes, there is a balm in Gilead, there is a physician there, and to that end, may we neither stumble nor falter. May we mount up with wings as eagles. May we run and not be weary. May we walk and not faint. And as we go, understanding that we are soldiers in the army. We have to fight, although we have to cry. We have to hold up the bloodstained banner. We have to hold it up until we die. Thank you. God bless you all.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan, for those incredible words. And I think we want you to know that in the Twin Cities, we know how much more there is to do and that we do not plan to take a recess. So thank you very much.